Hello, everybody. For those who don't know, I'm Steve Robson. I'm a reporter at the I newspaper. I'm the Northern reporter. Recently moved. I used to work at the Manchester Evening News, so been covering Andy's career for a little while.
I'm sorry for you now.
So I'm going to be hosting tonight. We've got lots of interesting questions, lots of different topics, and obviously. Although we've got pre-prepared questions, feel free to jump in and ask whatever you want, whatever comes to mind, and hopefully we'll have an interesting discussion.
We will. Thanks for doing it, Steve.
Do I need to do my hello?
Live. Millions waiting and watching.
Hello to everybody watching on the Zoom call as well. Just to repeat, if you didn't hear that, I'm Steve Robson. I'm hosting tonight, and we're ready to kick off with some questions, I think. The first one is from Gary Levine, who I think is in our virtual audience. Have we got Gary there? Do you want me to ask Gary's question, perhaps?
Yes.
Should we go with that?
Gary can have a follow-up if he's on there.
The question that Gary had was about the tram service, and he was asking, when can we expect the 6-minute tram service to resume on the Eccles line? Trams are packed now that restrictions have ended, and I think that's something that across the tram network people have been raising.
Yeah, so it's a fair question. I won't do the politician thing this early, but we do have Bob Morris here from Transport for Greater Manchester. I won't go over to you, Bob, straight off. It is a question that is very much on our minds because public transport has got a sort of long recovery from COVID, if we're honest, and that's at the heart of it. So if you look at the roads, in terms of the number of vehicles on the roads, pretty much the roads are back to where they were pre-pandemic. So the number of vehicles, the congestion, it's kind of what it was. That's not true of public transport because maybe people got out of the habit at that time. Maybe there was a kind of safety side of public transport. Also, people are probably not doing 9 to 5, Monday to Friday in quite the way that they were. So the effect of all of that is that trams are currently at about 70%, Bob, of what they were. And we are still in a position where we don't think, going to get the full recovery of that shortfall, because there is then a shortfall. And the other side of it is there's been an impact on staffing with regards to the pandemic as well, which has kind of affected the frequency of services across the piece. What I'm coming to, Steve, is that we're working towards that, but it's a bit of a phased approach to the return of the 6-minute service. Added to that, the Eccles line has got some long-planned engineering works taking place on it this year. Some of the road services need replacing. Some of the rails need replacing. So it's a bit of a period of transition really for the Eccles line. We are running doubles mainly on the line though, because of recognising the capacity constraints. So they're largely double tram services, but it's not ideal, and we recognise that.
Is it mainly, in terms of staffing, is there a lack of drivers, or what's going on with the staffing issue there?
Not so much. I mean, Bob, you might want to jump in on this. I mean, there's been an impact in terms of staffing availability due to absence linked to the pandemic. That's been a challenge. Bob, do you want to?
Thanks, Andy. Good evening. With regards to the Eccles line, there's been some specifics. We haven't been able to run a service from the Etihad to Media City, which makes the 6-minute service. What we are starting to do, as Andy said, from Monday there's an increased doubles, so we'll be doubling the capacity on 3 services in the AM peak and later on during the day. With regards to driver absence, we saw a large increase at Christmas, at 15% absent rate. That dropped down until the last 2 weeks. We're now back over 10% and some services are being cancelled. And we see that going on for a little bit longer yet, Andy.
Yeah. And that is linked to COVID-related absence still, isn't it?
That's purely COVID.
Yeah. I mean, I could say something more about this as we go through the night, but just to make people aware, you probably picked it up anyway. The case numbers that even are probably an underrepresentation, given people aren't testing as much these days. We are seeing quite an increase at the moment. So there's been a big jump in the last week in terms of COVID case numbers. Now, I know everyone thinks it's all finished, but the truth of the matter is there's a lot of it about right now, and obviously we would encourage people to test still and stay off work. If we would not say go to work if you've got it. We would want people to isolate if they've got it.
In that sense, is it going to be impacting other public transport as well?
Yeah, it impacts. It knocks on to all of it. And people can probably see that on the trains as well. The trains have slipped backwards, I think it's fair to say, and there's a mix of issues there as well. But they are not good enough again right now. Lots of complaints about Northern coming through. There'll be a mixture there of, some of the same issues around funding, but also certainly around staffing.
Can I raise a point there? So, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I commute at the minute between Sheffield and Manchester. My parents in Bury, so my job's over there. So this morning I left Bury at about 8:15. I sailed through at the bottom of the M67. Never before have I ever seen it. There was not a car in sight. Right, so if we've got all this trouble going on with the trams and the buses, and we've got people that's still testing positive and off work, how on earth have we got all these roadworks around Greater Manchester, and how on earth are we saying that we've got all this bad air, because there's not as much? But yet, from Manchester the other day, I was over at Trafford Park, it took me 4.5 hours to get to the top of Hyde Road. 4.5 hours, because 3 lanes was down to 1. Right, my job as a rep, I work for an account manager, is an absolute nightmare. Logistically, to go and see the number of accounts that my reps are targeted on to get them from A to B to C to D, you're talking their hours have increased up to 12 hours. Honestly, I can't get them across from anywhere, from here, there or anywhere. And at the minute, we've not got the support of the public transport to take off the cars off the road. We can't do it, can't possibly do it, because otherwise you're just going to have everybody. Man United, for example, the other week, I couldn't get a tram for 3 hours. So I ended up having to phone my dad up and get him out of bed to come and pick me up from Old Trafford. You just couldn't move from anywhere, from cars, buses, and nowhere to go.
So I understand what you're saying. Just need to ask, because the lady mentioned it and you mentioned it. Bob, take on this issue about traffic lights, because I've heard it said at no point. Well, can you just answer it directly for us, Bobby?
Right, so there has been no changes to the timing of traffic lights to delay traffic, none whatsoever. So there are certain standards that the traffic lights have to go. A lot of the traffic signals now we're automating so that they work on what traffic's approaching from the various routes. They're not all like that, but more and more are.
Because I do this route day in, day out, and I do my route plans based on khaki data, which is drive, so it gives you the optimised best route to do. Now, I can tell off the black box in the cars how long a rep has took to get from one position to another. Now, they're done on a 2-weekly rota of set plans. So why is it now taking those reps double the time, and their idling time at certain traffic lights is completely different to last year, to the year before, and definitely pre-COVID? And it's
a fair question. I mean, I don't know, if I'm honest with you, but. Yeah.
So when the pandemic started, we saw a big drop-off in traffic. That returned very quickly. Within 6 months, we were nearly back at pre-pandemic levels, whereas public transport wasn't.
No, never.
So,
the only thing I can base it on is on the figures from 2018 and 2019, while we were still going out repping, while they were still out there, and FMCG, we were feeding the nation. So what I can't understand is now, when I'm looking at those figures and those journey times for those journeys that these reps were doing in 2018 and 2019, 2020, of course, they were sailing through. But when you look at now the figures from when we started opening up and everybody started going back into the office, which a lot of big companies now have streamlined their offices, so more and more people are working from home, right? And we could tell. So why are the figures now longer at these traffic lights
Well,
when they're idling
I know
based on black boxes.
people didn't, but the figures that I get presented from TFGM and National Highways, or Highways England as they were, would say the same. Road traffic has come back to pre-pandemic levels. So,
but those traffic light timings when they're idling, so if I'm stuck at the traffic lights here at the top and I go out of this car park, my idling time on my black box is there, it's recorded. Now I have a duty of care for what they have on their vehicles, that I monitor where they are and what they're doing and where they're going and what.
Right.
So I do. We have to randomly pick out.
well, Bob, go on, you give another answer to that question, because I don't control the traffic lights, so and everyone thinks, but I don't, and
The figures are there.
the councils individually will control the traffic lights.
So in the majority, it's my team that does traffic lights, and there is absolutely nothing that has changed to say longer red time. Now, what's happened during the pandemic is the profile of road journey has changed. We used to have a lot coming into the regional centre and not so much traffic around local centres such as Bolton and Oldham. What we've seen now is there's far more local traffic impacting the traffic lights in those localities rather than the regional centre. So you will have incurred greater delays.
So would you like me to provide you with the 2018 figures, the 2019 figures, and you can compare with 2021 and 22, and you can see
I think if you do that, because I think this is clearly an issue that needs a transparent answer.
From a
So
business's point of view,
I understand.
It's not productive because we're losing time to the reps being sat idling at traffic lights.
Well, this is
and they're letting 2 and 3 through.
we'll arrange. I'll arrange for you to send it to me, and then I'll. Because Bob has just indicated that there may, because of people's travel patterns have changed, and that. Well, I don't think they are, because obviously we see a change. People are staying more local rather than.
Because my reps have certain shops and they've got certain criteria.
Well, all I can say is if you let us have your data, and then I'll get you a full report from TFGM.
Yeah, because I'm sure my big bosses down in London would love to see why.
Okay. No, we'll follow that up properly.
Some interesting points there on that, but can we move it on? We've got a question here about the pension fund. I think that's from Tina Wheatley, or I think somebody else who might have come in her place.
Yeah, sorry, Tina's got COVID, so I'm the B team. Why are the people of Greater Manchester continuing to invest in fossil fuel through their pension fund?
So, this is something that I have to be honest in saying that I don't control the pension fund. And the reason why I say that is not to say, it's nothing to do with me. It's because obviously the pension fund, anything I say or anything anyone says into it can affect the interests of the members of that scheme. So decisions they take can affect pensioners in Greater Manchester. It's easy for me to make a political statement about the pension fund. If it then has an impact on people's pensions, that wouldn't be right. However, I know what you're saying is something that is felt by many people, indeed some members of the scheme who I've just met outside. We have a target as a city region for 2038 as net zero. And there's a call to make sure the pension fund is aligned to that and is speeding up its disinvestment from oil and gas. I think the thing I would say is, I think the moment we're living through not just as a country, as a world with what's going on in Ukraine, I think is changing the way people are thinking about energy, and sometimes our energy dependency when we're buying in oil and gas from other countries. I think that is something that increasingly is going to kind of change the way we think about energy. And I would say the right thing to do is to accelerate self-sufficiency. And from a UK point of view, that self-sufficiency will come from renewable energy. That's the long-term future of this country because of our geography. And if you look at the grid at any given day, wind is up about 40% of our grid now. So it is becoming it's the single biggest contributor to our energy needs. So the answer I'm coming to is the change that we're seeing around the world, I think, might create an opportunity for a new discussion with the pension fund about how quickly change can be made without damaging the interests of the members of the scheme. Now, I just have to be honest and say those decisions will not be taken by me. I am not a member of the Greater Manchester Pension Fund, and it's not for me necessarily to say what it should and shouldn't do, because it's obviously independently governed. But I just make the broader point that there may be a moment now where we need to sort of review some of the assumptions around the pace with which the fund is disinvesting.
Just to pick up on one point there, Andy, there are some Labour MPs and politicians who've committed to a side on this. Do you want to, in terms of whether the pension fund should disinvest or not, but you want to explain why you can't do that versus they can?
Well, people can make statements, can't they? Political statements. I think in this instance, if I were to say something about this, the fund should do this by this date, if it then affects the interests of thousands and thousands of pensioners in Greater Manchester, because I've made a political statement, I have to ask myself, is that the right thing to do? Because I'm in a different position to an MP who's, not in control of the things that I'm in control of. So I just think I have to be careful to ensure that, yes, I want the objective of moving more quickly towards renewable energy, definitely. But I have to do that in a way that doesn't sort of, by making a political stand, I damage the interests of pensioners. But I think there's an opportunity, as I'm saying, to have a different look at this now, given what's going on with the debates about energy security on a broader scale.
Do you have any contributions from the floor on that? Sure.
I had a question just relating to you saying the 40%.
Just wait.
We're 40% up with wind energy.
Yep.
We're supplied by wind energy 40%. Why not double that instead of doubling our electricity bills as they are now? What have we been doing with all this money we've been contributing and paying into these electric and gas and fuel suppliers? For years, decades, we've been paying them an absolute fortune. Their profits have soared through the roof.
Yeah.
So why haven't we got more wind energy? Why we could have doubled that with the amount of profit that these people are getting from working class people who are struggling now.
Yeah.
Energy. I work with elderly, disabled and vulnerable people.
Yeah.
And I witness this firsthand, the suffering, the damage, the heartache and misery. And my aim is to keep them in their own homes longer, feeling secure and happy.
Yeah.
They can't do that. They're terrified. Elderly people now, because they don't even want to put the heating on because the bill's gone.
Yeah.
It's going to be double.
I've just been up in Bromley Cross before I came here tonight. I was just chatting to somebody in the street who said that one of his neighbours, who's recovering from cancer, is already sitting at home with the heating off because she's worried about what's coming in April, and that's the reality, isn't it?
Sure.
And I would, the danger, you've tempted me to quite political territory. I may as well go there. I mean, number one, there should have been a windfall tax in the spring statement today, because they have made excessive profits. Some of these companies, particularly in the oil and gas sector, over many years, they get the upside and the downside of when oil prices go up and down. The prices don't seem to fully reflect those changes. There was a case for a windfall tax, more than a case. It should have been done, and it wasn't, because they are benefiting hugely right now. But beyond that, a couple of further points to make. We need to ask ourselves, these things that were sold off in the 80s and 90s, has it put us in a better position or not as a country? And I could talk about the utilities and the bills that we pay for those utilities, but also I could talk about buses, and we'll come on to those again maybe later. Things that were deregulated or privatised. Has it left us stronger or weaker? And I would say the experience of the pandemic, certainly with transport, and I'm sure Bob would agree with this, was that we've ended up throwing money to subsidise private railways, deregulated buses, for very little return. Big numbers, big amounts of money have gone in, but what have the public got out of that? So, I think that's the answer to what I'm saying is we should have had a policy on energy that was much more about national security, energy security, but control of the system so that we could then manage the the bills that people face. In effect now, the Chancellor's having to chase those energy bills, and that's not a good place for any country to be in.
I think we've got another question at the back there. On this.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Just a supplementary question about the pension fund. Can I ask, Andy, that you look at the evidence to show that the interests of the pension fund holders would not be damaged by divesting from fossil fuels? Because that's been the situation. Other pension funds have decided actually the interests of their pension fund holders will not be damaged by such divestment. Because that seemed to be what you just said you were concerned about, that possible damage. So just asking, can you look at the evidence, see for yourself?
That is a really fair question, and yes is the answer. Yes is the answer to that. I did just chat to some of the protesters outside who made this point, and I think it's the point I was making a moment ago, that maybe there's a tipping point arriving here, because being trapped with investments in oil and gas may not be a great place to be for anybody, might it, given the speed with which the world might change coming out of this appalling situation in Ukraine. I don't think any country wants to feel beholden to other regimes with very different ways of running things, do they, in the future? And I think you might see then quite a big change, and those who've got investments in dying energy operations might find that they're financially not in the strongest position. So I think yes is the answer to what you're saying. I think that does need to be looked at. And I mentioned fracking. I think that's an example to consider, because I don't see any signs that although there's been voices calling for it, that the government are going to go back to fracking. Rightly so, because in my view, it'll be the north of England that gets fracked. It will be communities like the one I used to represent in Lee, where there was lots of shale there linked to the mines. But I could never support it, because what would it do to those communities where there was mining subsidence all around, the earth tremors and all of that? And there's just no way I could have supported it. So it's similar, isn't it? These things are pushed as though they're the future, but I don't think they are. Sometimes these things can delay the future. And I think you're making an important point, and I'll take it on board.
Is there any specific renewable investments that you would like to see, particularly in Greater Manchester, that we're trying to secure at the moment?
Well, I think wind is definitely got more potential. I mean, it is. I'm not making that figure up. If you look
in Greater Manchester,
yeah, because we've got the geography for it, haven't we? And there was a situation under the coalition government where they stopped. They made planning for onshore wind much more difficult, and it stalled the development of onshore wind, which was moving really quickly if you go back a decade ago, and it's been stalled in recent times. But if it hadn't have been, I think that 40% would be even higher now. We are looking at a hydrogen pipeline between the Liverpool City region and Greater Manchester that will be what's called blue hydrogen first, but hopefully green hydrogen in the long run. I think you've got to get into this stuff more quickly, haven't you? Solar, will that work in Greater Manchester? I think there's an open debate to be had about that.
The bikes won't work.
The bikes?
The bikes won't work in Greater Manchester because you've just said we don't have the weather.
Well,
That's the problem. I was just going to say, where is the energy going to come from? Because we don't have enough sun to even power our solar lights in the summer. Yeah. We're lucky if we get a few hours, aren't we? Let's be honest. The wind, well, then we go back to the clean air zone, because air moves. So obviously, if that air's moving, it's going to be turning that turbine to produce that power. That air's then not stagnant, is it? Do you know?
Well,
yeah.
sort of.
There's a lot of conflicting, interesting issues going
Well,
on.
I think if you look at what wind and solar are contributing nationally, it is about 60% now on any given day. I think oil and gas about 20%, and then the remaining comes from nuclear and buying it in from the people we buy it in from. Biomass, you're right, yeah. Say again, sorry?
It's not good, it's just as bad as the coal. We're chopping something down to burn it, the air quality is just as bad, and we cannot sustain that. The carbon dioxide that's going into the air is not being contained within the earth or within the plants, so it's not sustainable. It's not green, and it shouldn't be classed as a renewable.
Yeah.
It's greenwashing. like quite a lot of other stuff that's pumped out into adverts.
I mean, to be fair to the government today, I'm trying to be fair, some of the moves that they made today on removing VAT on solar panels and that kind of thing was probably a good move. Not that many people in Greater Manchester could afford that, but I do think we need to see wind and solar get the maximum. Biomass, as you say, I don't think that's not the future. But what that takes you towards is nuclear, and that will have to make a contribution.
It's so too many years to start building the nuclear power stations. And really, when we're at war with Russia, or when the West is at war with Russia, or we're feeling that threat, is it a really good idea to have nuclear power stations?
Well, I'm not
Just building your own bomb.
I'm not necessarily saying that I would, but you have to come up with a way of making ourselves self-sufficient through as green energy as we possibly can, don't you?
Yeah.
But there has to be a transitionary period to that.
Is it all right if we go to another question just down here?
I was just going to say, because...
Let's give this other chap a go.
Andy, can I just point out to you that on the 20 coldest days of the year, when this country consumes about 20% of its power, wind produces none of that, absolutely zero. And the only reason it's viable is because you're subsidising it, and you're subsidising it because elderly people are being overcharged for their power.
Well, I don't know that it produces zero. Well, I'd have to look back at the figures on that. It's not just me doing it. Obviously, this is the national policy, isn't it, to support wind energy of both parties, and I think it's the right thing to do. I think the thing that they shouldn't have done was cut the feed-in tariff for solar energy. I think that was a mistake a few years back. I think what's coming through here is we're going to have to move to a self-sustainable position, aren't we, from as green energy as we can. But I would say move away from, as the gentleman I think was hinting, move away from being beholden to big corporate entities that whack up those bills and give us very little control about what's charged.
This chap here, should we give him
Thank you. A friend of mine is an inventor, and he invented a power generating system that goes into flowing water. It can go on a riverbank, the water flows through it, turns an impeller, turns a generator, completely green. It can be hidden underground, so there's nothing like a wind farm. It can be done individually, it can be done in canals, rivers, flowing water from one reservoir to another. And I went with him to the NEC in Birmingham to promote this. I've been with him for the last 4 years and found out quite a bit about this, and I think it's quite a feasible thing to pick up, that just flowing water will produce electricity. If it's by a farm, it can also produce pump water for such as the fire brigade, for hydrants on remote farms, or sprinkler systems to water crops in drought times.
United Utilities could do more than they're doing. They could really dig in now.
Well, just if I could quickly on it, I mean, I don't disagree at all. I think it's an emerging technology, though, isn't it? And it's kind of what we're saying in the audience, isn't it? Until some of those things are fully established and used at scale, how do you kind of go from where we are today to get to a point where you can become more reliable on that? Just to give you some encouragement, though, my counterpart in the Liverpool City region, Steve Rotherham, has a plan for a tidal barrier across the Mersey, which is quite advanced now. And they believe that it could, if done in the way that they want, generate enough power to power 1 million homes across their region. And the reason why I'm involved a bit is because we would want to, you know, it could benefit us as well if they're able to generate power at that scale. So I think it's it's coming, is what I would say, and I don't disagree with what you're saying. The question is, when could it be put into a wide-scale application that allows you to depend on tidal or water energy?
It can be put into individual units. Thank you. And I'm sure this gentleman from the fire brigade in front of me here would agree that having pumped water to a hydrant on a remote farm is quite beneficial to the fire brigade that turned up with pumps of their own and have to start drawing water from local waterways.
Mm.
So it can be used in many ways that way.
Right.
How far up the agenda do you think all this is, Andy? It seems like it's obviously very important to everybody here, the energy security and what we can be doing about it within your remit, I guess, as well, because it's obviously a national issue, but also something that is very locally everyone's.
Yeah, no, it's very high up our agenda. We need to become the quicker that Greater Manchester is self-sufficient for its energy needs, and then the country is, the better, I would say. And I personally think that the geography of the UK means that that future is in renewable energy, and the quicker we embrace that and move towards it, I think the stronger the position that we will be in as a country. We've got some funding from the government at the moment where our 10 districts are creating local energy plans at a district level, because the truth of the matter is energy's changed. The old idea of a coal-fired power station putting all this energy into the grid, well, that's kind of going, isn't it? And what's happening now is there's local generation of energy, and it's a patchwork of local systems now, and we're the first part of the country to map how it all works and where we've got black spots and where we need to. So that's the purpose of this mapping exercise. It's become a sort of a bit of a patchwork quilt at local level. And it's a very big priority for us, because the more we're self-sufficient, the less beholden we are to the ebbs and flows of energy prices on world markets, or the behaviour of entities or governments that will seek to affect the prices. So it's a very big issue for us.
We'll move on if that's all right, just because there's something that's, I guess it's linked really. It's a clean air zone question. I'm not sure. We don't think Julie Kirk is she? Excuse me, online? No. So I'll read Julie's question. What help is being given to families on benefits to replace a vehicle under the Clean Air Zone scheme that own a van for day-to-day use and not a business, who simply have no funds for this and cannot afford the daily charge?
So it's on hold, as everyone knows, is the answer to that question. So there would be help. And there will be help if the government require us to carry on with the scheme that we had before. But in our view, that isn't going to happen, because we argued as Greater Manchester to the government late last year, earlier this year, that the current scheme that was coming forward, which was a Category C charging clean air zone, wasn't going to work, couldn't work without causing real harm to the kind of people that the questioner is pointing to. And consequently, we've negotiated a later date for the compliance under the clean air zone, so 2026 as opposed to 2024. And because of that, we believe now it allows us to do this in a very different way, so that you can clean up the air and not necessarily have to do it via charges, but you can do it via incentives to people. So those who want to upgrade their vehicle, we can then work with them and provide financial support to do it. But those who don't want to do it and can't do it, we still believe we can get to compliance, but without hitting people with charges. And it's been a painful process, as everyone can see, but we are in a position now where we think we can create a much more manageable path to cleaner air in Greater Manchester, but without causing real problems for families like is it Julie you said in the question?
Yeah. Sorry, can we just have somebody who's not asked a question yet, just this chap here? Sorry.
Yeah, it's my turn first.
This is very relevant.
Let's just ask this chap first, and then...
Thanks, Andy. We all know that information that you've just given us, but the issue is that CAS scheme is a scheme that GMCA designed. including yourself. And that's in writing. It's in
Non-charging government.
yeah. It's in business cases. It's in the outline business case that was signed off by GMCA in February 2019. And if you give me a minute, I could actually quote the words from it, if you'd like me to.
Well, you're perfectly. It's not actually. Let me just answer you, because obviously that's your point of view. I have a different one. I could point you to a report on BBC North West Tonight. It was about 3 weeks ago, where it quoted from the government paperwork sent to the Greater Manchester councils that required them, if you hear me out, required them to use a charging Category C clean air zone as the benchmark. So basically, the government said that is what you have to model that. If you let me answer, you can come back and ask your question. That is what it said. I can supply the documentation to you. I can.
Let's just,
if this is the case, is what you're saying, why, can I just say to you, just look over the Pennines to Bradford. Why are Bradford councillors, including Conservative councillors, complaining in the media this week, look it up, that the government is imposing on them a charging Category C clean air zone? Why has the Liberal Democrat leader of Portsmouth Council... One second. Why has the Liberal Democrat leader of Portsmouth complained about exactly the same thing? If what you were saying was true, and we uniquely came up with this on our own, why would people in Bradford be saying the same as we are? Why would people in Portsmouth be saying the same as we are?
It's here. It's all here. All here.
What's your question, just specific?
Non-charging clean air zones. These are defined, right?
All here. Now then, charging clean air zone. Clean air zone proposals are not required to include a charging zone. Next one. Shouldn't impact
I will put
on
up,
businesses.
I will put up on Twitter tonight the document where the government required us to model a charging clean air zone. This was correspondence sent to Greater Manchester.
Can I ask you why in Sheffield it's only 3 streets and it's a non-charging castle?
Because
in Sheffield, right by the side of Rotherham, where we've got where we've got every industry, is 3 streets in Sheffield and not one mention of a charge, not one mention.
Because every area is different in terms of the... No, I'm just trying to answer your question. If you don't, if you ask me a question, I've got to try and answer it. It's meant to be a Q&A, not...
I'm quite passionate about
Let's just make sure Andy gets to answer the question before we...
Because every area is different in terms of the level of...
Hang on. No, sorry. But can we please just let Andy answer the question before we start coming back with more?
So every area is different in terms of the number of areas in that area. Well, let me answer I can't answer the question if you're coming back. Well, I'm just trying to tell you, we had 152 sites that were in exceedance, and that was why all 10 councils here, you asked me about the size of the clean air zone, it's why all 10 councils the government gave them a legal direction to take action. And I know you want to blame us, but the truth of the matter is they issued the legal direction, and
That's what it is, a directive.
I'm sorry, they did. That's just a fact.
Should we take a different question on it? Is there someone at the back there?
I think...
Sorry, let's just let somebody else ask the question on it.
I think the problem is, obviously, there was a directive issued by the government.
Well, apparently not, according to people here.
So a directive for a...
It'd be helpful if everyone had dealt in the facts here, because that is a fact.
So it's a directive for a clean air zone. It isn't a directive for a 498 square mile clean air zone. And so my question is, why is it a Greater Manchester wide one, rather than each individual borough targeting their individual problem areas?
Okay, that's a fair question. So it's because it was issued to all 10 councils, so all 10 got the legal directive.
Let's just let him answer a question.
All 10
please.
got the legal directive. They did. All 10 got a legal directive to achieve clean air compliance by 2024. And they were required to model against the charging clean air zone, as I said, and we can show you the correspondence that backs that up. Now, you are right, just let me be direct with you. They could have gone to a more localised approach within each borough. They could, so that you are right about that. They took the judgment that that would be unworkable and confusing for people. And actually, the best thing to do was to have a zone that didn't include cars, because Birmingham went with cars, and we were clear here that we were not going to go with that. But because we weren't doing that, it would have to cover a wider geographical area. And by doing that, the thinking was that we'd be able to bring in funding on a wider scale to help people change vehicles. Now, it was always going to be challenging pre-pandemic. The pandemic, I think, made it unworkable. And that's why we went back to the government and said, this can't be done in this way anymore. And we were the ones who went back to them. No. They wanted us to then accept a date of 2025. We said we couldn't. Hence, the new legal direction is based on 2026.
Can we just have a question from this chap here now, please?
Okay, yeah. It's along the same subject, but it's kind of different. People are extremely frustrated about this CAS. But my question talks really about how it occurred. On the 26th of July 2021, 9 Bolton Conservative councillors, as in a small cabinet, unanimously approved the unworkable CAS in our Bolton district. So what I want to know is, why were all 60 Bolton councillors excluded on this highly important matter?
I don't believe they were they? This was a vote of the council, was it not? Or?
Yeah, no.
It was a cabinet vote, sorry.
It was.
Oh, sorry, I'm with you now.
And it's a cabinet vote of simply 9 Conservative councillors who are a majority cabinet, and especially considering that over 10 years ago the public rejected similar proposals, and clearly the processes that were followed under your leadership has led to this select few to represent all the views of elected councillors. It doesn't seem democratic, it doesn't seem fair. And Andy, you say that you're all about fairness and democracy and devolution, but that whole process has allowed a handful of people in each of these towns to agree and railroad this programme, which has caused you no end of trouble. Had it been done democratically, everybody would have been able to discuss the proposals. It would have been transparent rather than hidden inside a cabinet, hidden inside some committee being told we have to do this, we have to do it this way, this is the only way to do it. And clearly that was wrong. So the big question is, are you going to disband that process and learn from the mistake and go back to respecting the electorate who have put 60 councillors here in our town who have their views, and similarly in the other towns? Because if you did that,
I'm grateful for your question. I'm grateful for your question, and I feel like clapping your question because actually it helps explain a lot about the situation that we are in. Because you said under my leadership, I don't. 1 second, honestly, just please listen to me, because I know there's been a sort of a spin operation, if I could put it that way. I don't have a formal role here. I do not have a formal role. What you are describing is a legal direction from a Conservative government placed, in this case, on a Conservative council. Yeah? It was entirely their decision, that council, Bolton Council, how they decided to implement that legal direction from a Conservative government. Conservative government to a Conservative council, they chose to handle it via their cabinet. Other councils didn't. They put it to a full vote of every member of the council. In fact, most Greater Manchester councils did that. So yet, 1 second, yet it's all about me. I'm uniquely responsible for all of this. I think this is where we've got to get to the facts of this matter. That legal direction came from the government to the council, and I think, as the gentleman over there was indicating, it was their responsibility to decide what they were going to do. I couldn't overrule them. I couldn't tell them what to do. They had to take... No, it wasn't all Labour.
It was all Labour.
Well, I'm sorry. You're just not understanding the issue, if that's your view, because this is a Conservative council that chose to handle it in that way, and they made their own decision on it, and it isn't. I will take responsibility for many things in this life, but I will not take responsibility for Conservative governments or for Conservative controlled councils.
Hang on. Sorry, we can't just shout in. We can't just shout in. I know, but it's not really working as a Q&A.
Just answer the question.
If you shout in. Should we have one more on this, and then we'll move on? I think this chap here's not asked a question. Let's give him a go.
Well, my question is about
No, you've already had.
Hello, Andy. Yes, I just wanted to find out your opinion on whether you, instead of charging car owners for getting older polluting cars off the road, should we not be looking instead at generous government grant schemes for vehicle scrappage or upgrade as a better solution to cleaner air?
I think so. I think exactly that. And as I've tried to say tonight, I never said, let's have a charging clean air zone. I never instigated that policy. This is a government policy. And actually, if you listen to Conservative councillors in Bradford, they are saying tonight that they don't want a charging clean air zone. Councillors here said the same thing, but we were forced down that path. I think with the delay that we negotiated, and we negotiated a delay to 2026, it actually creates an opportunity to do this via incentives rather than blanket charges, which is what I was trying to say before. So I think what you've described is a much preferable way of achieving the improvement in air standards that we want, i.e. you do it via positive incentives for people who want to change their vehicles rather than hit everybody with a charge. And I think we've got the opportunity to do that now. The reason why I can't say to you tonight that the call from the Labour leaders of Greater Manchester to have a non-charging clean air zone will succeed is because the government signs it off, as they signed off the first scheme. They have the final say.
Thanks, Andy. I think let's move it on from the CAS, because we've been over quite a lot here, and there's a linked topic.
You can ask another one. I can answer other questions.
You said that it was, as far as it went, it wasn't debated properly with the people. You only got 4,000, what was it, 4,100 that got questionnaires about CAS. So can I ask you the question now? It's going back to government in July. So you want 493 square miles of Greater Manchester in this CAS charging.
No.
So are you going to give every household in Greater Manchester the chance to have a proper referendum on this to see what the people of Greater Manchester want?
So I'm not proposing that. I'm not proposing a charging clean air zone. I very explicitly just said to the gentleman that the proposal we have put back to the government is, just let me answer the question, then you can come back. I'm not proposing that. So we are formally saying to the government that it should be a non-charging clean air zone. But when you say, well, I require it, it's the councils that, individual councils have the decision about the extent to which they consult the public. So I can't
Yes or no? Do all of us, do we get a referendum on what we want in Greater Manchester?
Well,
No, yes or no?
well, no is the answer, but not because I said you can't. Yeah, but
We can have a referendum, Andy. All we have to do is vote to leave Greater Manchester. That's a referendum we can have.
All right, shall we move it on? You made your point, I think, here. Just as a linked topic.
Because it's the government policy that we're implementing. It doesn't make provisions for a referendum on it. I'm sorry. The government lost a court case on this issue, and then they passed a directive onto councils.
A directive is a directive. We're all not.
So, i.e., they gave people no choice. They had to do it, and that's where the problem comes from. And you're never going to. You don't. But why are people in Bradford saying the same thing as us? Why are people in Portsmouth saying the same thing? Because they're subject to the same approach from the government, and that's why they feel the same.
We've got a question here about the RPAS scheme. The RPAS scheme has made a big difference to my life, but I have a little brother, and I'm worrying that the pilot is ending before he could benefit from it too. What has to happen, or how likely is it that the scheme will continue?
I think it's, I say, hopefully very likely, because I would have to get the support of the 10 leaders. But the RPass, which is the free bus pass for 16 to 18s in Greater Manchester, is something that I'm personally very committed to. I think it has changed a lot of young people's lives and given them opportunities that they didn't have before. I am hoping that it will be permanent. That's what I'm working towards. And I said last week, given that we're taking control of the buses in Greater Manchester after 36 years of a deregulated system, given that Wigan and Bolton will be the first area to receive re-regulated services next year, the whole point of taking control of the buses is to implement one of the points, a new fare structure. And what I would like to see going forward from next year, here to begin with, but then everywhere as we franchise all the buses, is a fare system where journeys are capped at £1 for a child fare from 0 to 16, where they are free for 16 to 18-year-olds, recognising that they have to travel more because of education and employment, and then capped at £2 for adults. So that is the proposed approach that we're taking, and I hope the RPass will become a sort of permanent feature of a new bus system in Greater Manchester as we move to that new system.
Just to move on from that, actually, and another transport question from that was from Ellie on Twitter, actually, and also from Mike on Twitter. With another day of major disruption, what is Andy doing to improve the reliability of Metrolink, which continues to let the city down and stop people getting to work? I think there was also, I saw the other night, people complaining about, coming back from Old Trafford and things like that, similar.
Oh, well, we touched on this before. I mean, Metrolink is in a position where it's not, fully back to where it was pre-pandemic. As Bob was saying, we have had and do have ongoing challenges with staffing. There have been engineering works. I think the reference being made there is there were long-planned engineering works. I think that was the case, wasn't it? That sometimes when the football fixtures change, we TFGM can't just change the engineering schedule. It's a bit like the situation with the FA Cup semi-final at the moment. Engineering works get planned quite far in advance because they have to be, and then all of a sudden a big game lands, just when those works are scheduled. So Metrolink is the country's by far and away most successful light rail system. It has its challenges, no question about it, but it still operates at around a 98% level of reliability, which is overall good. I'm not saying it couldn't be better. It could still be better. But I think we should be proud of Metrolink, to be honest. I think overall it's a really good service for the city region.
Yes, sir, go on, if you've got another.
Thank you. I'm going to bring it back to the CAS.
You can do it, it's no problem, you can. I'll answer any questions on the CAS, you can. Yep.
Okay, I specifically to...
Yep.
I don't want to argue with you, I don't want to beat you up about it. Everybody wants to do their bit. I want to do my bit. My van needs replacing. I've been sweating like mad, day in, day out, night after night, before Christmas. As soon as I started seeing them signs going up, they didn't even know what it was about. A666, and I've seen these coming into effect. I want to get a new van, Andy, but since it was implemented that it was going to come out, prices of vans have skyrocketed.
Yep.
It's insane. My van's depreciated now. No one wants to buy a said non-compliant van. But it's bloody brilliant. It works. It gets me from A to B. It's got a roof rack. It's clean. It's passed its emissions. I'm looking at new vans now trying to buy them. It's gone from 8 grand, then it's 10 grand. So, all right, okay, I've got 9.5 grand for a van. I want that on top of it. You guys got 142 million. I think that's what you got.
120.
Forgive me, 120.
Yep.
And you said you would give it us. Give me £3 grand tonight and I'll go and get a decent van.
Well, listen, I totally...
I'll meet you. I'll put 9.5 towards it. Give me £3 grand
I'm
and
totally,
I'll go and get a new van.
Totally in sympathy with what you're saying. And for those who listen to the hot seat that I do every week with Mike Sweeney, in addition to this, it's been obviously been challenging at times, but actually late last year, I was beginning to reflect what you've just said, i.e. I was becoming more and more aware about the challenges people were finding with the cost of vehicles, the way they were increasing, and the availability of them. And it was that made me start to really think, is this thing going to be workable? Because, as the colleague just said, Bolton Council passed it in July 2021, as did a lot of the Greater Manchester councils. But a scheme designed some time ago was kind of hitting the reality of 2021, and it was increasingly not going to be workable. So that led me to commission research through TFGM on the prices in the vehicle market. That research came back early this year that said the price inflation on vans had gone between 15 to 60%. And that was one of the major pieces of evidence I put back to the government to say, this scheme is not workable anymore without causing real harm. And you kind of say, you laugh or whatever. I went down to the government. I went to Westminster to talk to the Secretary of State for the Environment, and I made the case, if you like, I know people don't feel it this way, but on behalf of you, to say this can't be fair anymore because people can't buy replacement vehicles, even if they wanted to try and do the right thing. So that was actually the evidence that we took back to the government and said, we're going to need a change here because we can't do this without putting people into real hardship. So that is where we are at the moment. You might think, well, how did we ever get there? And people are asking that question. But our thinking was that we would open up funding for people to replace vehicles, which for some people would be a good thing because they get some funding to replace their van. What that didn't take into account of how much the inflation would jump up. So I would hope we would get to a position where vans are not included at all. You know, we've got a non-charging category B, so we're looking at buses and HGVs. That's what we're trying to work towards. And that lies behind the date of 2026. Camper vans out, you know, we said that. I said that earlier.
How can you say one thing is out, one thing isn't?
Pardon? Just 1 second on the camper vans, because it's... go on, ask the question.
I've got a camper van, so will I have to pay CAS tax on the camper van?
So, from my point of view, and from, if I could put it, I think all 10 leaders' point of view, but certainly the 9 Labour leaders, but I think it is all 10 leaders, we want camper vans, motorhomes, and horse boxes, those type of vehicles out of any scheme whatsoever. Now, the reason I have to hesitate about that is, and I have to, otherwise I'll get accused of something later down the line, is it goes to something that you challenged me on before, but it is a fact. We do not have the final say. The final sign-off is with the government. The councils are asked to present plans to the government, and as with the first CAS scheme, they sign it off or don't sign it off. So I can't say to you tonight, definitely, because we're going to have to go into a negotiation with them about the July scheme.
Some people all their lives have saved up for this. I'm 62, and since I was 18 I wanted a camper van, and I bought one last year before I knew anything about this CAS tax. And now it's like my dream's on hold. I've got this, and will I be able to afford to drive it in the future?
I don't think camper vans will be included. And I'm saying that hoping that the government will go with us on this. But we're really clear that camper vans, motorhomes, horse boxes should not be included in the scheme. So I think I wouldn't say you can stop worrying about it completely, but I think you can relax a little on it because I wouldn't say for a couple of years, once the compliance is achieved, I know everyone thinks that this CAS will be, it was always meant to be a temporary measure to get us to clean air compliance. I won't be running it any longer. I mean, why would we? So you can relax about it. I mean, we've not got the final signed off scheme, but I would be really, they would have to impose it on us that your van or vans like yours were included in the scheme.
Can I just see if we've got anybody in the virtual room who wanted to ask a question on this, because we've not had anyone from there. I think we had a question from Kevin Lockwood. I'm not sure if he's there.
Got Nick.
Is that Nick? No. So, well, I'll read Kevin's question just because it was for someone from and it is on it's continue on the CAS, and it's from a slightly different perspective. Hi Andy, I'd like to ask about your proposal and that of the council leaders across GM to implement the non-charging Cat B CAS. Your own evidence now confirms that vehicle use in Greater Manchester is near pre-pandemic levels and that the link between vehicles and harmful pollution has been demonstrated. Given that private vehicles account for the majority of pollution, something that's recognised by the Cat D schemes being implemented in Birmingham and expanded to cover the whole of Greater London in 2023, how can you rationalise your office's intention to meet the old World Health Organization targets with a scheme that is regressive and unlikely to tackle the toxic pollution that causes such immense harm to thousands across our city?
Yeah. So, as I said before, Birmingham does have cars in their scheme, and they've gone for a smaller area but with cars in it, and that presents different challenges. London has a much wider scheme. I think they've extended it recently. Also has cars in it. When we had a date of 2024, a Category C charging scheme was the only thing that got you to compliance by that date. So you didn't have to have cars in it. So that was basically the judgment made. The truth of the matter is people are changing and upgrading cars all of the time. So even though we'll never have cars in our scheme, they are still contributing to the improvement in air quality because people are slowly upgrading cars over time. We're confident, we'll have to sort of debate this out with the government, but we believe we could get there with a Category B non-charging scheme if, I think as the gentleman in the middle said, sufficient funding was put in to create the incentives for people to change. For those who want to change, maybe the gentleman who wants to change his van, if the funding is put in, you can do this without charges. And I still think that is a much better way to go than just hitting everybody with a tax that some people can't avoid.
I think the gentleman down here with the cap's not been able to ask his question.
This guy go first, he wants a question.
Oh, fine, okay.
Andy, I think you've certainly convinced me of your honesty on this. What I would say, though, is that there have been a couple of pieces of democracy that have happened in the last few years. First of all, the people of Manchester had a vote on congestion charging, and 78% of them said no. We also, sadly, had a vote on whether we wanted a mayor or not, and we also said no. So that makes me wonder what makes you think you have a mandate to impose this on us.
So I remember very well, the vote on the congestion charge. I was the MP for Lee at the time, and it was resounding, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
So there's a couple of things to say about that. This isn't a congestion charge.
Yes, it is.
I know what people will.
There's no difference as far as the people are concerned.
I understand why people would say that, but obviously a congestion charge is a charge to use the roads, whatever your vehicle. You're just charged every day in London. If you go into the congestion charge zone in London, you get charged come what may every day. The ULEZ that they've got, they call it a ULEZ down there, ultra low emission zone. You don't get charged if you're. They are different things, but I understand why people will. But I said I'd never have a congestion charge, never. I made that clear when I came in as mayor. But I didn't have the ability to stop what came forward. I didn't have the power to stop what came forward because it was a government directive on the 10 councils. They were under a legal direction. So that's a reality. On the referendum for a mayor, it was only Manchester that had a referendum, the city of Manchester. So the mayor of Greater Manchester was a different thing.
But the people of Bolton want to leave Greater Manchester.
But if I could just, there's a theme between the two things that you mentioned. When Greater Manchester went into devolution negotiations with George Osborne at the time, because he was the one who drove this, and it was under the banner of Northern Powerhouse at the time. What happened to that? But that's how. If you remember how this grew, the deal that was done between government and Greater Manchester went as follows. The thing that Greater Manchester would not sign up for unless it was included was the power to re-regulate buses. That was the absolute non-negotiable ask of Greater Manchester if it was to sign up to a devolution deal with the government. The non-negotiable ask of George Osborne was an elected mayor for Greater Manchester. And the deal was done. The 10 councils didn't want particularly an elected mayor. It's true, isn't it, Bev? The deputy mayor is here, and they do say it publicly. But it was required as part of the devolution deal. So Greater Manchester got to re-regulate its buses. The government got its way and wanted an elected mayor, and obviously they're introducing elected mayors across the board now. So what's the parallel? The CAS and an elected mayor for the city region were both required, imposed, well, not imposed because GM signed up for the devolution deal in the end, but that is a fact. That is how both of these things came about. And the CAS actually is strange in terms of policy terms because it sounds like people dreamt up an idea and tried to impose it. It comes back to the government losing a court case against an organisation called Client Earth. The government was ruled against by the High Court. The government then, the Supreme Court, sorry, yeah, the government then had to pass that obligation onto councils to take action to make them, the country, compliant with the law of the land. So it wasn't as if it was dreamt up by anybody here. It was if... They could, but they're the government. I mean, we don't control the government.
The truth of the matter is that this all comes from EU directives in the end. And we need to learn now. We've got new politicians like you, and I like you. I haven't voted for you, but I like you. And I possibly would have.
I'll take that, don't I? Thank
you. We've now got a situation where a 40-year career civil servant has got no experience of running an independent country. We are now an independent country, and yet our civil service are still looking to the EU for direction. And it's time we tested them, you're sacked, and we'll get some people in who can say no.
Okay, just a quick reaction to that. I understand again what you're saying, but they were put into UK law, those targets, so they're in a UK Act of Parliament, and they haven't been changed. You know, so it's still the government's, this current government's policy to have those clean air targets. I think for health reasons, and there is good evidence why they're needed. Well, I would say there is. So that is right. But where I'm going to agree with the second part of your question, I think you can see this in the P&O debacle, scandal, I should say, of what's happened this week. Because if I'm honest with you, I didn't vote to leave when I was the MP for Leigh, but I understood why many people in Leigh did choose to vote to leave. One of the reasons being that I often saw how wages were undercut free movement was used to undercut wages, and I had real experience of that. And I understood how, actually, sometimes the way Europe operated, it was allowed a bit of a race to the bottom, if you like, to the lowest common denominator, because people could move workforce around. Right. So I think I can, although that wasn't enough to persuade me to vote that way, I still could see the problem that people were concerned about. So having left, what happens? We're in a situation here where the government signed off Chris Grayling signed off a thing a couple of years ago that said the ferry companies only have to notify the places where the boat is registered. They've signed away the rights of those seafarers. Absolutely, never mind levelling up. They've taken the floor from underneath those poor people. And is that what people thought they were voting for when they voted for leave? You know, surely the idea was to put stronger protections in place.
I voted to stop giving them a pound and getting 38p back.
Let's just bring in another person off Twitter so that everybody's contributing to it. On sort of transport and everything again. On buses, how will the new bus system work? What will happen with current bus drivers and buses? Will new buses have a similar yellow design like the Met?
Yeah. So my kind of vision for transport, and I take the lady in the second row was rightly kind of raising issues about transport overall not being good enough, and it isn't good enough. What I've asked Bob and TFGM to do is bring forward an integrated system where effectively trams and buses are one, single livery. It all operates as one system where buses operate in a complementary way to the trams, not competing with the trams as they do at the moment. And it's all much more integrated. So you could tap in on a bus, then tap out and go onto a tram, and it's kind of carried us one journey across the city region. That is what we're trying to do. I want to have a standard GM bus like they have in London. So for older people or disabled people, they know exactly what is pulling up at the curb when they're waiting for a bus. They know what the bus will be like. It'll be a standard design. It'll have a standard layout. There'll be audio-visual announcements at the bus stop and on the bus. That's what we're trying to do. When I say London-style system, that's what I mean. And that's what we're trying to create.
Can we just have this lady who's got a hand up here? Who's not?
Well, I put that vision out at the last mayoral election, and that's democracy, is it not? That was what I put forward: a bus system that operates for people, not profits, where the bus companies don't call the shots. For 36 years, the bus companies have set the ticket prices, they've set the routes, and they've decided what buses they'll have on the roads. And actually, some of the companies have had polluting rubbish on our roads for many, many years. What I'm saying is, we should decide what the fares are, what the routes are, and actually have buses going to hospitals and places where people need to get to, run it as a service, not as a profit-making enterprise, have services for every community. Look at Oxford Road in Manchester, buses one after another because it's the lucrative route. Go to a kind of estate like Higher Fold, like I used to represent, you find nothing there at all. And that's the nature of the deregulated service that we've got. Now, I can see you may not agree with it, but I want a regulated bus service where we have a cap on fares, where we have every community with a guaranteed service, when we know that the buses that pull up at the curb are accessible to all people, and there's real-time information about when buses will turn up. That's the system that I want. If you don't want that system, that's up to you. But I think it'd be a lot better than what we've got today.
Just let this lady have a question here, because she's not been able to ask a question yet. Yes, sir.
It's going to be completely off topic what we're dealing with, but I'm just very conscious that we've only got 20 minutes left. My question is, it's a nationwide question, but is particularly interested in relation to GMP. I'd like to know what GMP and children's services within the Manchester region are doing to tackle domestic abuse.
Yeah, thank you. Such an important question. We've got the Deputy Chief Constable, the new Deputy Chief Constable, Terry Woods, here. We've also got Steph from your from Bolton Division. So,
one of the points I really wanted to raise was there's a new domestic abuse bill that's recently come into force. Now, personally, I have had nothing short of a shambles of an experience from Greater Manchester Police. I have reported it in since, well, about 2 years. I've been reporting domestic violence from my perpetrator, and I have received a shocking service from Greater Manchester Police. So I want to know, are Greater Manchester Police taking this seriously? Is the domestic abuse bill fit for purpose? What are they doing to cover post-separation abuse, the impact that that has on the victim, the extended family, and any children involved? Because what I'm doing at the moment is I'm banging my head against a brick wall by speaking to a number of different authorities who aren't interested. They pass the buck constantly. And this is obviously a nationwide issue that needs to be addressed. But from a personal perspective, I think GMP need to stand up as well and give some guidance as to what's happening, because the only option I've been left to do is raise it with the Chief Constable and raise it at inspector level, because the police on the ground floor aren't interested. They show no empathy. We're a waste of time as victims, and that is completely contradictory to the Enough campaign that's being bandied around left, right and centre.
Yeah. Well, I'll just start by saying I'm sorry to hear that, and that isn't good enough at all for someone in the position that if you're being in the position that you're in. And there's no point in saying otherwise. This is an area where GMP hasn't been up to standard for some time, actually, not just recently, for some time. We are giving this a much higher priority under the new Chief Constable and the new Deputy. We have set up a board chaired by the Deputy Mayor, and the Deputy Mayor here, Bev Hughes, is here on the front, and maybe, Bev, you might want to say a little more about this question, because we're not going to disagree with what you're saying. Well,
Frequently, we have a number of statements from him. I'm undergoing vexatious litigation. We have spent as a family the best part of about £90,000 defending allegations.
That sounds...
False allegations against
me with my family, and it is evident that this individual is a perpetrator of domestic abuse. I work in the legal field myself. I understand the interpretation of the legal system, the law, but why aren't the police doing this? All I'm doing is being fobbed off from one police officer to the next. They told me they'd attend my house. They never turned up. There's a couple of police officers within Bolton Police who have done a fantastic job, but I've had police officers roll their eyes at me, make me feel like an absolute waste of time. I've been told I'm not a reasonable person, but I have proof. I work in the legal field. You need evidence. I have written evidence, and not one police officer is taking this further.
So I'm going to ask Bev just to say something on the work that Bev's doing on the gender-based violence board. But if I could just say, I mean, we can't go into all of the, you know, it sounds awful, and the money that you just mentioned obviously is a huge amount of money. I'm sure Terry won't mind, but if we just have your details at the end, so we can ask at a senior level a review be done, just to make sure that what should be done is being done. But I probably can't say any more about the details of your specific situation. But Bev, do you want to say something about gender-based violence?
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm really, really sorry to hear what you said, but I'm glad that you've come and said it. Because if there's any circumstances like that, where people are experiencing that kind of response from the police, then I want to hear about it, the Chief Constable, the Deputy want to hear about it, and he'll tell you, because I'll ask him just to speak in a minute, that I've sent him myself cases that have come to me, I've sent him 2 this week, where we know that what police officers done on the ground is not what we would want them to do and expect them to do. Having said that, for all of us, this is an absolute priority. And there are many, many, many police officers who care passionately about this, as I do. And we are trying to improve the response and to improve the experience that victims of domestic abuse get. It might surprise everybody here if I tell you that domestic abuse, domestic violence is a volume crime in Greater Manchester. There are about 60,000, upwards of 60,000 cases reported every year. That's 5,000 cases a month. I'm just explaining that, not to say that it makes any excuse at all in terms of the response. It's just to say that this is such a problem. And largely, not exclusively, largely a problem for women at the hands of men. And it's a gender-based crime. And we're really, really focused on this. As Andy said, I know talking about boards and all of that in relation to your human circumstances doesn't sound very kind of strong, but we have established this new board. It's a multi-agency board. It's not just the police, because the police themselves can't deal with this, absolutely. It needs other professionals to work with us to support the victims. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Have you? Okay, yeah. 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 Well, as Andy said, I mean, if he hadn't said it, I was going to say to you, I will come and take your details myself, and we will look into this very closely. But just to say about the new board that's going to really drive this, it's not chaired just by me. The co-chair of this board is a survivor herself, because we want to put the voice of victims right at the heart and the centre of the way we try and get the improvements that we want to see. So look, I'm really sorry to hear what you've experienced, but thank you for raising it. Pardon?
We live it every day.
Yeah, I know.
Email, the smallest text message, another set of court proceedings that we have to defend, because that's his MO. He just keeps taking me through the family court.
Yeah.
And the family court don't work with
It sounds rather, it sounds that there's some very particular aspects to your particular case here, and obviously I don't know all those details yet. But we will get them from you, and we will look into this in great detail and talk to you about it. But I want to assure you about the priority this has for all of us. I don't know if Terry wants to say anything on...
Yeah, thank you. So, first of all, we're sorry. And, Steph's here as well. Steph's in charge of policing in Bolton. Like we said, we'll have a conversation, we'll look into it. Yeah, but I'm just sorry. On a broader note, just to echo a couple of things that Bev, so both the new chief and I have been brought from different areas. If you check those areas, sort of, I was Lancashire, although I'm a Bolton lad. You know, a very strong reputation. Those forces around service. It is really it is a very challenging area to work in, and I know by what you've said you completely agree with that. But it can be done well, and certainly what I've experienced in the last 6 months in Greater Manchester, what we're doing is some really massive reconfiguring of resourcing at the minute. Indeed, we've got a board tomorrow around some key investments, one of which is detective resilience, and making sure that we pump prime, put millions of pounds worth of upfront investment into those sorts of specialists that can give a good service to victims like yourself. And just around priority, if you look at our literature now and you look at the priorities that both the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor, I mean, it is a near daily conversation around our key vulnerabilities, which is domestic abuse, domestic violence. So, yeah, I can only apologise, but assure you that certainly the leadership team that we've now got in place in Greater Manchester, we're very clear on what our priorities are, and it's back to basics, protecting victims and locking the baddies up.
If we can keep it on GMP and crime. I think we've got a question in person. Is it? Or is it GMP? Yeah, fine. Okay, go for it, sir.
Thank you. Cheers, Mayor. Thank you for helping Bernie out as well. Thank you, mate. I've always given the police an hard time, but I was talking to the Deputy Chief tonight, and I'm just concerned. We're in Bolton. Have people forgotten what happened to Reece Tansey? Have you? 15-year-old lad lured out by other 15-year-old lads and stabbed to death. And you're all belting on about that CAS tax. Oh, we've got to have some priorities in our life. But it's not just Bolton, Bury, Cole, Kershaw, Oldham, across Greater Manchester, knife crime within our youth and that kind of thing, it's skyrocketed. Skyrocketed, and it's really scary. These are your kids. These are your kids, so stop crying about, belting on about things and focus on in things that should be focused on. It's our children, the most important. But I've just noticed the age of these kids goes down and down, and it's just really upsetting. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I've already talked to the Deputy Chief already, and I've talked to the Chief at Trafford, and I do like the characters who I've talked to. I haven't got a lot of confidence in the police at the moment, but I know they are trying. They've increased arrests on violent crime, as the Chief said last week, 40-odd% or something like that. But what are we going to do about our youth? What are we going to do? Shall we? I know we go to schools, I know the police go to schools and all that lot, but something that's never mentioned is parenting. I'm not blaming every parent, but these parents must know what the 15-year-olds are up to.
Yeah. Well, you're raising such a crucial sort of issue. Well, we've had a number of incidents, haven't we? The one in Bury was that 2 weeks ago. There was a lad in Tameside, in Hyde, I think it was. I don't know if people saw Channel 4 this week, but a lad by the name of Yusuf Maki, who was killed in South Manchester, in Hale of all places, you know, and this is everywhere, isn't it? And as you say, it's a sort of scourge, if you like, and it's not just here, by the way. I think that there's other parts of the country as well. Now, I just wanted to say, I appreciate what you said about GMP. They are definitely under new leadership, and the Chief Constable and the Deputy Chief and all of the top team and actually all of the divisional team have got their priorities in the right place. I couldn't look you in the eye and say that was always the case, but I do believe it is absolutely the case now. If there's a controversial issue, if it follows to me, if there's more weapons being carried, you have to do more to apprehend those weapons. Now, I know stop and search is a difficult issue, and it needs to be used carefully, but it was recently authorised to be used in this borough, if I'm right, Terry and Steph, but also in Lee and other areas where there were designated areas where those powers were used because there was a belief that more young people were carrying weapons, and that's part of it. More police officers on the street, that's another part of it, and Bev and I have put the investment in to put more police officers on the street, and there will be more recruited this year. We have a knife crime summit with Nazir Afzal, who was the former Director of Public Prosecutions for the North West. That's happening a week on Friday to debate this with youth groups and various others. So that's another part of what we're doing. But some of it has to be, so enforcement, yes, and we are doing that. But prevention has to be a part of this as well, and diversion. And the cuts that happened to youth services, if you go back 10 years ago, have been very damaging. And we have to do more to put more support into communities. So we're running a pilot, the Deputy Mayor and I, in various areas at the moment where we are running community-led approaches to tackling youth crime, knife crime. And we believe empowering communities to do more about this is part of the answer as well, because they will know, they will have the intelligence amongst them of who is the young people who pose a risk, who are carrying the weapons, and you've got to empower those communities to do more to deal with some of these issues themselves. So all of it has got to be in play is what I'm saying to you, but it's absolutely right up there. You know, we see what's happening, we are worried about what's happening, but the GMPC leadership and ourselves are absolutely, we won't flinch from some of the difficult stuff like stop and search if we need to use it, but at the same time there's other things we need to do as well. So, thank you for asking.
In Moss Side, they got the mothers.
I know.
The mothers.
Arimma.
Silence in Moss Side.
Yeah.
They got a grip of the sons.
They did.
Because they were aware of what's going on.
They did. Arimma was one of those mums. Arimma Bell, I don't know if you know, and so she's coming to the summit next Friday. Yeah.
Andy, just to pick up on something there, because you've talked about before with the clean air zone and how we got to a place. Do you want to address how we got to this place with this stabbing epidemic? What do you think that we were slow off the mark with it, basically?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's if you remember, I went to a Downing Street summit with Theresa May as Prime Minister on this issue, because it's been growing over the years. It's not just a sort of a thing it's been building and building and building, and it's, as I say, it's not just here, it's all over the country. So what has changed to make it the massive problem that it is? I do think social media plays a part. I'm looking at the age of most people in the audience. My brothers are both in education. What they say is, when we were at school, there'd be a bit of a thing, a fight or something, or at the end of the school day, and everyone would come together. But then people go home. Now there's videos of it, and people get goaded, and so the next day, the kids who are feeling threatened, what do? They come, do you see what I mean? There's a bit of an arms race here, where kids who feel intimidated by this and the use of videos and the goading and the bullying that goes on, I think end up starting to carry more, and then that's the sort of thing when rumour are that person's carrying, well then that person starts. I think there's something about de-escalation here. I don't know what Terry and Steph think, but I don't think things seem to escalate very quickly to very serious incidents now. Whereas there was a time when others would intervene and would let it, but it doesn't seem to be that case anymore. So what's the violence reduction that we can do here and helping people manage challenging situations? I think it is obviously related to our own police force, but I think it's societal as well. And I think the pandemic has left a sort of a kind of a challenge with regard to young people and some young people and their behaviour.
Is there anyone in the audience who hasn't asked a question yet? I think there's a guy at the back there. Is this chap just at the back here? Yeah.
Don't mind, we're running slightly.
Just want to make sure everybody gets a chance.
Sorry. I don't want to be attacking you in any form of way with this question, but throughout this evening and over the last couple of months where Kaz has been concerned, and I promise this isn't just a Kaz question, we've heard you say a lot about that's not my responsibility. The police force went into special measures the other year. We heard you say that's not my responsibility. Tonight we've heard you say traffic signals, not my responsibility. When it comes to this, what is your responsibility?
So, I mean, okay, I'm just going to try and give you an honest answer because it's a fair It's a fair question. So when you hear the title, Mayor of Greater Manchester, you think, not unreasonably, that I'm pretty much in charge of everything. And the truth of the matter is, I have things that I'm in charge of, but I'm not in charge of everything. The 10 councils remain in control of lots of things, but often I will get the complaint or the criticism. The truth of the matter is, the devolution situation is incomplete. I've been offered a negotiation with the government following the Levelling Up White Paper to give more powers to elected mayors, because there's a recognition that we don't have the full set of power. So I'm just going to try and say to you, my experience 5 years into this job is often you carry all of the accountability, but without actually the levers to do things. So just to address GMP directly, what I was accused of by some people was, that it was my responsibility to go out there and tell them who to arrest or what. The police is independent. Bev and I do not run the police. We don't tell them who to go and arrest or what to do. They are rightly independent. We don't live in Russia. This is a very different arrangement. But so when I was saying it's not my responsibility to run the police, that isn't what I do. What I do is hold them to account. And when the issues, Bev and I were raising issues with them pretty much repeatedly over the last 5 years. Within 2 weeks of coming into office, I commissioned an independent review into child sexual exploitation in Greater Manchester, because I had major concerns about the way it had been handled in the past. And actually, it was the whistleblowing of Maggie Oliver which led me to initiate that review. And that review is ongoing. It's had its first phase, but there will be further phases coming soon. Bev and I commissioned independent work looking at the implementation of the computer system. The point I'm getting to is, our job is not to run Greater Manchester Police, it's to hold them to account. And when the HMIC said what they said in 2020, knowing what I'd known from the reviews I'd set up, I used the main power I have in respect of Greater Manchester Police, which is to change the leadership. And at that point, I acted and I brought in a new Chief Constable, and he subsequently has appointed a new Deputy Chief Constable, who you've heard from tonight, and a senior team. So that was directly my responsibility, to hold them to account for you. But I believe I've done that, and I believe that Greater Manchester Police are now improving. But if they don't improve to an acceptable level, then by all means hold me to account at the next election. I'm not ducking away from that at all. I inherited a police force in 2017 that had massive cuts to its frontline resources. It then had to deal with what we saw at the Manchester Arena, and so it was a demoralised, weakened police force that wasn't in any state that we would recognise as being the right one that we would want for Greater Manchester. And Bev and I had to unpack that. We didn't always get the full story, it has to be said, from the previous leadership, but we did hold them to account. But when the moment came, when I had the evidence, then I acted and I changed the leadership. And I believe the Chief Constable that I appointed is now returning GMP to what Terry said before, basics, absolutely where the public want them to be, the right priorities, and I would say that is what I have done. I have been responsible for holding them to account. That's exactly what I have done, as well as funding them. And as a result of what Bev and I have done, there'll be 1,000 extra officers in GMP today compared to when we came in 2017. It's ongoing work in progress, but that is, we've exercised our responsibilities, and I believe we can already show that GMP is now turning around as a result.
Sorry, you've asked too many. Can we just have the virtual room?
Who was responsible for the IOPS?
So that was signed in 2015. So the scheme, the IT programme, this is a factual answer, was all the contracts were signed 2 years before we came into office. And I know with all of these things, they get a certain way of being described in the media. 2/3 of that system is Terry or Steph, correct me if I'm wrong, 2/3 of that system is working well now and is embedded. So the majority of it is okay. There is an element of it, about a third. So that third, the element that is not working okay, is up for contract renewal in the middle of next year, 2023. And the decision that we were faced with was, and obviously the chief and Terry, the deputy, were listening to Steph and others. Frontline colleagues were saying it isn't good enough, and they didn't believe it would ever be good enough. So the decision we were faced with was, do we renew that? It's called police works, which is an element of IOPS. Do we renew that in 2023, or do we now say, no, that's not going to deliver for Greater Manchester Police, we need a different system? So the decision is to get a different system. West Midlands and I think the Met have both gone for, we will end up, I think, with a similar system to what they have got. A tried and tested, well, we don't know yet, but it's possible that we could, because there's going to have to be a sort of a further round of procurement. But that's where we are at the moment. And, you know, I know it may sound like, you know, again, but that's just a reality. This contract was signed before the Deputy Mayor or myself came into office.
Given it's been raised, Andy, can you tell us about the costs that's for the public?
Well, the costs are the costs that were signed in the contract. We evaluated this looking at what it would cost us to continue with police works, which, as the front line have said, is a defective product, or whether, because obviously the contract's coming to an end, whether it would make sense to procure a new one. I think I'm right in saying that the chief believes it will be more cost effective to do what we're doing. So the contract was signed, you know, that was set, and I think about £5 million has been recovered from the contractors that signed, with whom we signed that contract in 2015. Around that figure, I may have it wrong within a bit. But now we believe it will cost us less to go and re-procure that police works element than to carry on with the system that isn't working.
But presumably there have to be a new budget for the replacement of that IT system.
Well, there's a budget for IT, isn't there? You know, because obviously we'd have if we were going to renew that product, we'd have to pay for it. It wasn't going to be. It wasn't the case that you just buy a system and then you never pay again. You have to pay to continue to have the license to use those products.
Do you think there's been enough transparency over this? I think that's the point that we're getting to overall, really, about.
Well, the gentleman rightly said to me, what's my job? So Bev and I have the job, as we said, of holding them to account. When the problems happen with IOPS, we commissioned an independent report by the HMIC, which was done in late 2019. We then did a further investigation into wider GMP issues that also looked at this. So it's because of that work that we got to the bottom of what was wrong with this system. I'll just be honest with you, the previous leadership was saying to us, there's nothing wrong with it, this will work, there's another upgrade coming, it'll be fine, it's just bedding in. But the truth of the matter is that wasn't the case, and because of the independent work that we did, it revealed the fairly deep-seated problems with not all, but part of this system.
We are in overtime, so I'm just going to make sure we ask somebody from the virtual room a question, because I think they've been waiting very patiently. Should we have the Badger group?
I don't mind, if you don't mind, I'll take the last hands up as well.
I'll go on then, fine.
But as well as the person in the group.
Let's just make sure you give the virtual room a chance. Oh.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, Andy.
Hiya.
So quick, just obviously this is GMP as well. I'm the chair of South Manchester Badger Group. We're a new group. We started 12 months ago. And my question is, when will Manchester's wildlife crime be taken seriously? All the boroughs across Greater Manchester have fallen victim to those exploiting the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 and the Protection of Badgers Act 1992. And yet the statistics don't reflect this. We've had volunteers injured. Development crime is at an all-time high, and so is badger baiting. But it's impossible reporting it. When we do ring, we get given a log number, and it never escalates to a crime number, even though legislation states it's a crime. So is there anything that can be done, implemented immediately with regards to the reporting system?
Well, thanks for asking the question, and it's not one that's been asked of me before, so I need to say that to start with. I think the answer lies in what I was saying a moment ago in terms of GMP in the past deprioritised issues and, if you like, screened out certain things. And in our view, myself and the Deputy Mayor, it shouldn't have done. And that's the change that we're seeing with the new leadership at Greater Manchester Police. Now, I don't want to sort of speak beyond my knowledge of this particular topic, but I'm going to let Terry just say something in response. But my view would be, crimes are crimes. And, you can't just say, well, this is a crime that we will look at and this is one that we won't. I don't see it that way. The law of the land is there for a reason, and it should be enforced. Police sometimes have to make difficult choices about which ones they can give full attention to and which ones they can't. But I would not support a situation where we just sort of push all of what you're saying to one side. Terry, do you want to add to that?
Well, when I left Lancashire, I didn't think I'd be talking about badges again. But there we go. A couple of things on it. So the first thing is I come from a force that's got probably more challenging wildlife and rural issues than Greater Manchester has on the surface. Please don't think that as a negative. Think of it as a positive, because actually I know what I'm talking about, because I was the person that set up the wildlife crime units, the rural crime units in the last force, fairly recently actually. We've got a different landscape here, but I do agree with you. Wildlife crime and rural crime, because there are rural aspects of Greater Manchester. It's not all the city, is it?
Yeah.
Certainly the audience here. I'm not a million miles from here where I live, but it's pretty rural. What I would suggest, though, because what the chief and I have to do, it's a big budget GMP when you look around the country, but it's got big issues. We've got to make some choices. And what we've done when we've got here in conjunction with the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor is if you go online, we're running a massive exercise at the minute, because we want to be convinced that our neighbourhood policing offer, one, is better, because we've been, as a force, directing neighbourhood policing away from proactive, preventative things that we think is important, dealing with very reaction-led things. So you end up in a situation where we're reacting to everything and not preventing nothing. So you'll see in the very, very near future, and it started across the force, that we start dedicating our neighbourhood resources to deal with issues in communities, long-term issues. Can
I just speak, Terry? Because obviously I know we're pressed for time. So we're a new group. We've been going 12 months. People are under the impression that South Manchester doesn't have badges. Even the police force, we had a meeting with Bolton Police Station about 3 weeks ago. They wasn't aware we had badges. And we've had so much crime go on. However, we hit a brick wall when it comes to the reporting system. So I'm on hold for 101 for 2 hours. When the call handler answers the phone, we've been informed that the way that it's logged internally is what affects it going any further. Now, our concern is we had 2 shot badges in Staley Bridge, and I never even got a return phone call. Yesterday, we've dealt with a baiting incident in Mosley, 3 cubs, don't get nothing back. And because it only being a log number, it's not being logged as a crime when legislation states that it is.
Okay, so just 2 things and then I'll finish off. So the first one is, if there's a way of you leaving your details, I'll speak to the boss at Oldham, get him to have a look at it and contact you.
It's all over South Manchester, it's not just Oldham, sorry, okay, it's full of South Manchester.
Okay, but if you give me your details, I'll get somebody to make contact with you. Just let me finish on the point I was making round. We've got, so your group, if you go on Facebook, get them to engage with the neighbourhood consultation we're doing at the minute, because that is going to feed how we restructure neighbourhood policing. And if there's a case, from what you're saying, to get an enhanced rural wildlife function, because a lot of this comes down to experts, it works better when experts are dealing with it, as per my last force, then we'll look at trying to factor that in. But you please just engage with that to give us the evidence so we can justify that. But if you can find a way of leaving your details, I'll get somebody to contact you.
Okay.
Right.
Would you be willing to, because I know Craig Fellows, who trains the police force, has offered to train GMP police officers. And the National Wildlife Crime Unit have said that it would be fantastic if GMP could be trained.
If I could just jump in to say, you know, I hear you say your group's 12 months old. I'd be happy to meet you as a group and take on board some of what you're calling for as a group, and then I'll, you know, liaise with Terry and his team to see what changes we can make.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thanks. Were you keen to have one more from the audience?
Well, I realise we're over time, aren't we? But there's been hands up, and I don't want to just walk away with that with people who've had their hands up for a long time. So if I could take I think there's 3 hands I could see. If we could take those 3, if everyone's...
All right, let's do that as quick as possible.
Thank you. Just going back to the schools, my partner was an administrator at a school in Little Bolton. I'll not name it because this will probably apply to many schools. First of all, a 13-year-old who was apparently quite large for his age threatened a new teacher. The teacher never went back to school. She's aware of children that have been chastised by teachers, and the parents have come in either drunk or on drugs and threatened the staff for chastising the children. So what chance do the police have when they're not getting proper parental control as well?
Yep.
And I can just mention this, albeit briefly, I am an ex-police officer. Mm-hmm. And this has been going on for a long time. That now you can't chastise children, they're just running riot. Knife crime is becoming a badge of office for kids. They just want to find out what it's like to stab someone for no apparent reason. So what chance do the police have, you know, to tackle this?
It's a real big challenge, isn't it? And I think that's what I was saying before. It's societal, isn't it? The change is bigger than the police, and I think there's all sorts of complicated factors behind it, as you say. I think we've got to get tougher in many respects. Is what I'm not against that. I think we do have to empower schools to be tougher. I proposed school-based police officers when we were working with GMPE.
There is a police officer based at that.
Some people have campaigned against that, but I saw them work in Lee, and I still think there's a case to support the teachers with school-based officers. I better just take the questions if I can, otherwise we'll be overrunning quite a lot.
Mine's a bit similar to this gentleman's. I'm wondering what's being done about all the antisocial behaviour. On our estate, you've got tasers, you've got pellet guns, they're putting the windows through, they're egging cars. Yesterday, there was about 7 or 8 police cars and vans come down. They were throwing grass on the car, they were putting hay on the car. You can't go to the shops. My disabled granddaughter went, they trip her up outside. My daughter, who lives in the flats opposite, they threatened her with tasers and everything. And she phoned the police, and they came about 3 hours later, and there were PCOs who couldn't have searched them or anything like that. Well, where are they? And she said, well, it was 3 hours ago that I phoned. They've gone home to bed now. You know, so I'm just wondering what's been going to be done with antisocial behaviour all along the board.
No. Well, I mean, I think it was what Terry was saying before, that you don't just come in with a response and go again. You have to get underneath what is going on in the homes of the kids who are doing those things. I mean, I went through this in Lee a lot, where we had to kind of put pressure on. I'm going back a while ago when antisocial behaviour orders first came in. they worked, and I don't know why they got rid of them, this government, but they did work. And I think we need to go back to some of that approach where you kind of get underneath why some kids in certain areas can run amok without any seeming form of control. But I think it's what Terry was saying, you've got to get underneath those issues, and that's what GMP are trying to do with the new leadership. It is about resources as well, though, and more police on the streets.
Bolton at home, some of the children live in these properties. So Bolton at home have been saying now for about 4 years, if this carries on, they'll be evicted, but this is like 4 years on. So many more broken windows, so many more cats attacked, so many more windows smashed, so many more car tyres slashed. It's horrific where we live, and I've lived there 38 years, and it's never been like that.
Well, again, we'll take away, if you could mention to Terry the location exactly, and then we'll take that away. I better take the last question if that's okay, because I'm going to have to let the team get home at the back. They've done a good job for us.
The question that I prepared, I was actually going to ask a different question, so I don't know if I could just ask a quick supplementary after it. It relates to Horwich, where we are today.
Yeah.
So a recent survey showed that 83% of residents thought that Horwich would be better off without Bolton. A subsequent online poll said that 89% agreed that we should leave Bolton Borough. Since then, Horwich...
The Leave campaign's getting stronger and stronger, isn't it? Bolton leave, Greater Manchester, Horwich leave Bolton. Where are we going to end up here if we carry on?
Since then, Horwich Town Council has unanimously requested a governance review to the Secretary of State. So the question that I wanted to ask was, after 50 years after the 1972 Local Government Act, do you think people should have a say on their future, or do you think the status quo works?
I think the status quo is working. I mean, and I speak as... well, I got this debate a lot when I was the MP for Lee. A lot. We want to get out of Wigan. You know, I used to get that all the time. And sometimes I could understand some of what lay underneath that. But actually, does that make sense to have minor, small administrative areas and the cost of running a sort of separate council for every... Well, you'd spend a lot of money on bureaucracy if you did that for one. And it would be quite, I don't know, it wouldn't be easy to work with an area that was all in those tiny little pockets. And I think sometimes, you could have your own views about whether Horwich has had the right level of investment over the years, but this place where we are now is obviously... some people will see it different ways, but has been beneficial, I would say. If you look at the Lee Sports Village, I used to say to them, Wigan Council does nothing for us, but I said, well, look at the Lee Sports Village. Wigan Council underwrite that. And I think, you won't agree with this, so I'm just going to say, I think we're getting into a grumbling mentality where we're just looking more and more reasons to disagree with each other. And it feels to me that's where we're going as a society. We're constantly arguing amongst each other, and then getting into a position where everything's terrible and nothing. Greater Manchester, to the outside world, functions pretty well. We've got a transport system that's not the best, but it's better than other parts of the country. We've got inward investment coming into all of our boroughs that is way beyond what you see in parts of Yorkshire, North East, or in Merseyside. The city centre is fairly vibrant, and that is starting to ripple out to the boroughs. So people have to take their view. If you want to get out of Greater Manchester, well, that ultimately is something that Bolton Council could vote to do. Or if you want to get your own district out of the borough that you're in, you could, in theory, vote to do that. But I would say there's more of a success story here than perhaps people are recognising. And Greater Manchester is doing better than lots of other parts of the country because of the success that's been built by working together. It's always better to work together, I would think, rather than go it alone myself.
And
I think that seems like an appropriate place to end it, really. I think, doesn't it? Let's try and all stay friends.
Just on the supplementary, though, on the point of working together.
I think. Well, do I enjoy it? Sometimes. I mean, just to finish off on this point, the gentleman's question was...
Just on the supplementary one, I did email you last week, actually, on Thursday or Friday, so obviously I appreciate you're busy and you've probably not got to it yet. back in January, I messaged Councillor Martin Cox regarding Great British Railways. Obviously, Horwich has a great railway history.
Yeah.
To see whether Bolton Council could submit a bid on behalf of Horwich for Horwich Loco Works. Obviously, with heritage being 2 of the 7 key criteria for the government, for the levelling up and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Martin Cox replied saying that he would take it away and speak with the regeneration team, and then he replied again to say that he'd be taking it forward. Last week, I emailed you because I smelt a bit of a rat, and this week we find out that Bolton Council has submitted a bid, but it's submitted a bid for the town of Bolton, and Horwich is basically excluded. Horwich Town Council, of which I'm on, I'll declare, isn't able to submit a bid because it's not a relative authority. It has to be done by either a unitary authority or a combined authority. So my question to you, Andy, is obviously the deadline has passed, but the criteria is quite clear about the criteria that you need to meet, but also the fact that the Great British Railways process reserves the right to choose a location or shortlist a location by not using their criteria. So my question is a simple one. Will you write to the Secretary of State for Transport to raise Horwich as a possible location?
No, is the answer. So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to, because obviously that's Bolton Council's decision. You know, in fact, we were trying to get one location in as Greater Manchester, and I think, if I'm honest, neither of those locations was being proposed. I'm aware of the history, Horwich RMI, you know, so I understand the history, but I'm just being honest with you, that was their decision, you know, and obviously there's a local democratic process in the borough, and it wouldn't be right for me to overrule it. And it kind of falls into the last question I was asked, do I enjoy being mayor? Well, sometimes, as you can say, not massively, but, you know, and I take the point that the gentleman said about taking responsibility things. I do try and, I will always take responsibility where I am directly responsible, but it is a bit, you know, I've seen it quite hard in recent times with the kind of climate that we're in and through the pandemic. The pandemic was hard and all the issues we had with the government over tier 3 and everything. It was tough, if I'm honest with you. It was very, very hard. But overall, the answer is yes, because it's a privilege to do it. I love this place. I love the people. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. I don't want to live anywhere else. I will do it to the best of my ability, and I'm trying to do it to the best of my ability. Not everything is under my control, as I said, but I'm trying to face up to things that even the CAS I faced up to when it wasn't going right. I still tried to face up to it and deal with it. So the answer is yes, because we're making some changes that I think will benefit Greater Manchester. If we deliver the transport system that I described before and we end the free-for-all on our buses that we've had for a long time, nothing would give me greater satisfaction than that. And I'm in the job to make changes. I'm not in it to score points or play politics. I'm trying, and GMP, I want GMP. I don't think GMP were ever right in my 16 years as the MP for Lee. I'm being directly honest with you. I have hopes now that under the current leadership, we may finally get a police force that is right for the people of Greater Manchester with a focus on strong, proactive policing. And that too makes me do the job because I want to see Greater Manchester Police where it should be, which is one of the country's leading, if not leading, police force. It's not been there for a long, long time. Let's just be honest about that. But I believe we have a chance of getting it there under the current leadership that we've got. These are the things that motivate me. Trying my best. I won't get everything right, and I'm sure you will all agree with that. But there we are. Thanks for coming tonight, everybody, and I hope you found this useful.
Thanks, everybody.